The main character says that today he will take care of the office. The girl leaned on the guy's back and said that she wanted to take a short break. The young man could think of nothing but the girl's chest pressed against him. He thought that he couldn't do this anymore. He needed to focus on building the magic tower. The guy opened his eyes. He was lying on the floor. Slightly bent down, he began to look around. He did not understand where he was. There were other people near him. Suddenly, an old man with a beard came out, opened his arms, and said that the call had been successful. People around started to rejoice. The rest sat on the floor in bewilderment. Ragona Ekista, the chief royal court magician, greeted the people from another world. He reported that they used high magic to summon them. People were perplexed. They assumed that this was a reincarnation in another world, or, more accurately, a transfer. The old man understands that they lived their lives in the past world. He asks for forgiveness for this forced call. He then added that those who wish to return will be able to do so to meet their doom. People were very surprised. Ragona explained that they only summon those who are about to die. He asked if anyone remembered what happened before the transfer. The main character came to a realization. The bus he was riding in fell off a cliff. The magician said that the main thing is that they are alive. He also added that those summoned in their world can receive special power. He thinks that they will appreciate the new abilities. One of the guys has cold magic, another has gravity magic, and the third would be great at being a paladin. Everyone was happy with their abilities. It was the main character's turn. The man raised his hand above him and told him not to be nervous, but to just concentrate. Ragona thought about it. The young man asked if everything was okay. He answered that it was the first time he saw such power. The protagonist opened his mouth in surprise. The main character's skill is construction company. The magician didn't understand what it was. Everyone was very surprised. One of the guys laughed at the main character. He said that the construction company was just like his father's. And the others asked what that even meant. Ragona asked Takanoji what it was. He said it was like carpentry and stuff. A company that does all sorts of things. Design, carpentry, construction. Then he patted the main character Kinoshita on the shoulder and told him not to be discouraged. This business was very profitable. The young man was in despair. Fencing training. The man says that they need to get used to the sword first. The protagonist is clearly not thrilled with what is happening. While everyone can handle the sword with ease, it's very difficult for Kinoshita. The girl and Takanoji quickly and effortlessly deal damage to the target with their sword. The knight is very impressed by the movements of these two, and the main character at this time does not understand why a magician should own a sword. The other guy agreed with him. Next comes the magic training. Ragona explains that by making mana circulate inside the body, they can activate magic. Kinoshita followed the instructions and only got a bolt. The guy who had cold magic used the skill Ice Room, and the one with gravity used Gravity Sphere. Ragona said that this was a great result. All the summoned are talented in their own way. The protagonist looked at the bolt he created. And then he looked at the rest of his comrades. They were chatting pleasantly among themselves. Point 3, 4. He felt like a superfluous person. The chief knight suggested taking a break and going to the dining room. Everyone headed in the right direction. The main character trudged along alone. Suddenly he heard someone talking about how they were not getting anywhere. He noticed people standing and trying to fix a hole in the stable. Kinoshita became interested in this. The men didn't understand how to use the equipment. They couldn't do anything. No matter how hard they tried, they had the feeling that they were doing everything wrong. They exhaled and decided to go and rest a little. The young man watched them. He took the tool in his hand and looked at the hole in the wall. And the next moment, his body began to move on its own. First, she cut the wood. Then, using the prepared boards, I patched up the hole. He worked as quickly as possible, as if it were a natural thing for him. The young man was clearly surprised by what was happening. When the three men returned, they were shocked because the hole in the wall had already been patched up. Everyone is already sitting in the dining room and eating. However, the young man has no appetite. He picks at his food. The protagonist stood up and approached Mr. Akist. He asked what had happened. Kinoshita realizes that he won't be of any use in battle. He asked to be given some other work. The magician scratched his beard and thought. The old man told him not to worry. Support is a very important aspect of any battle. Usually, such people die first due to weak armor and protection. But there is another option, to leave the kingdom. The boy shouted and asked what he was suggesting. His classmates were outraged. The magician noted that the hero does not have magic, and his characteristics are so-so. These words hurt the guy. Imanaka stood up for the boy and said that he could build something. The other guys also stood up for the guy. They can't just call a person and send them away. The old man realized that the situation was getting tense and said that no one was going to abandon Mr. Kinoshita in trouble. He simply wouldn't survive in the wild, where there are many magical beasts. The girl noticed that he wanted to get rid of him. The man denies everything, although, in fact, everyone was exactly like that. Kinoshita clenched his fists and asked if there were any other methods. Rigona said he had thought about it a lot, and then he announced that the young man could become the owner of the gallery fortress. The guy was very surprised. The man explained that he would be paid a salary and assigned an assistant, and he could leave military matters to the people in the fortress. The old man asked if the guy liked this plan. Kinoshita's comrades pounced on him with congratulations. They gave him various pieces of advice. The young man thanked Mr. Ekist. He decided to call his assistant. He raised his hand and called someone. A beautiful girl entered the room and introduced herself as Karan Makvel. She would be the assistant to the owner of the fort. All the guys were amazed by her beauty and stood with their mouths open. Kinoshita said that it was nice to meet her. The girl bowed, thereby greeting the future boss. The cart is going somewhere. The main character, Kinoshita, is riding in it. He is sitting on a box. Suddenly, the cart hit a bump, which had an unpleasant effect on the guy's body. Karan asked if everything was okay with the gentleman. He replied that he was simply not used to traveling in a carriage. The girl suggested turning to healing magic if he was in pain. She is trained in the basics of healing magic. The young man smiled and asked her to help him, because he was really in pain. She, in all seriousness, told him to take off his pants. The hero was surprised and asked again about it. She asked the guy to take off his pants again. Kinoshita decided to refuse. She explained that she had to touch the part that needed to be healed. The boy refused. Karan didn't understand why. Wasn't he bothered by the pain? He replied that he was simply ashamed to show her his butt. The girl did not force the gentleman, but added that his health problems should not affect his work. The guy replied that he understood her. Karan smiled. Then she invited him to sit next to her. And at that moment, the carriage ran over a rock, and as a result, the guy fell on Karan. They were both surprised. The guy's head rested on the girl's chest. He stood up abruptly and started to apologize. She replied that everything was fine and asked him not to move. She put her hand down his pants. Kinoshita was surprised by the girl's actions and tried to break free. She again told him not to move. She began to read the spell and heal his butt. The girl asked about the guy's condition. He answered that he felt hotter. She hopes that he doesn't think she's hitting on him. The young man denies everything. The girl understands that guys have their own reactions. And the guy doesn't mind being touched by such a beautiful lady. And then he explained that his navel area was burning. Karan understood that it was the center of mana concentration. A person's internal mana accumulates there, and magic can use these reserves at the right moment. Kinoshita noticed that right now he felt a large surge of mana. The girl thought about it. Karan guesses that their powers are getting closer and interacting. She decides to try to infuse more mana. The guy tried to stop her, but she said that she was only doing her job and asked him to focus on the mana flows. The hero does not understand how one can concentrate in such conditions. Suddenly, there was a bright flash. The coachman and the horse were in shock. Karan congratulated the guy on the fact that his magic was successfully activated. The young man fell asleep, and the girl noticed that he was already 18 years old, but he was still such a boy. Looking at her sleeping boss, the girl said that it looked like she would have to try hard. The carriage approaches the fortress of Gallery. The boy noted the size of this place. He imagined it to be a little smaller. Karan explained that this is the western outpost. There are a few monsters here, but this does not make this fortress one of the key points. A stranger sits at a table and writes something. A knight bursts into her office with a report. He announces that the new master of the fortress is about to arrive. The girl accepted the report and said that it was time to meet the new boss. Kinoshita was getting out of the carriage at this time. Suddenly, he heard the sound of someone's feet. It was the stranger. She introduced herself as General Arietta Paimon and extended her hand to the boy in greeting. The young man introduced himself and shook her hand. The general examined the boy and said that at first glance there was no difference from them. only dark hair and strange clothes. She asked the guy not to think anything strange. It was just the first time she saw someone summoned from another world. The knights looked at Kinoshita with fear. Karan explained that the provincials were afraid of the unknown and the different. Arietta asked the boy about his skill, which he received after being summoned. He replied that his skill was construction company. The girl assumed that he was some kind of carpenter. The young man agreed and explained that he could use magic to build buildings and so on. She asked him to demonstrate. He agreed. They arrived at the training field. Kinoshita and Arietta suddenly stood opposite each other. The others watched nearby. The young man decided to try to make a wall here. He put his hands out in front of him and thought that he needed to remember the feeling he had experienced in the cart. He had to. 10 minutes passed. All the knights were already bored. The girl asked how much longer it would be. The young man replied that he had very little time left. He managed to make a concrete block. Arietta was surprised. The young man began to build a wall. Everyone watches what is happening with surprise and open mouths. The wall looks very high. Having fallen, the young man asked if he had succeeded. The general agreed. She came to look at the wall that was created by the power of the master. Kinoshita asked her to be careful. The wall was not high. The girl just touched it, and it took and fell. Arietta apologized and then ordered everyone to return to their posts. Kinoshita looked at his hands, smiled, and clenched his fists. He believes in himself. Karan sits at the table and thinks about Takeru Kinoshita. She remembers all the moments associated with him. She thinks that he is just like a puppy. He does not have any magic or a sword. She hadn't thought then that he would give out so much Mara. That flow resonated with her mana. She had read that this could happen to two people with a deep affection for each other. Maybe that was the power of the summoned? She doesn't understand what it was. It was as if her body was engulfed in sunlight. It was as if she was in someone's big hands. She was inside, and her hands were completely covered. Having woken up, the girl decided to watch some more. The maid wished the boy good morning and said it was time for breakfast. He got out of bed. He looked like a zombie. The girl got scared, asked for forgiveness, and ran away. The guy asked her not to leave. Then he sat on the edge of the bed. There was a basin of water for washing nearby. Kinoshita washed his face and noticed a tray with breakfast sitting nearby. He reached out his hand for the bread, but then changed his mind and went somewhere. The main character put on his glasses. He noticed a door from which a foul smell was coming. The guy is sure that this smell is from their toilet. He decided to open it. Inside was shocking content. Not a sight for the faint of heart. Kinoshita closed the door and ran away. He went out into the hallway and sank to the floor. He felt terribly sick because this smell was everywhere. He noticed something he had not noticed before. How good ordinary things were. Then some girl noticed him. She walked up to him and asked if he was okay. The guy turned to look at her. It was a beautiful girl who looked with excitement at the boy's pale face. Kinoshita replied that he just felt a little sick. The girl gave him a handkerchief. The guy thanked her. She thought about how she couldn't leave him here like that. She asked if he really didn't need help. She noticed that she had not seen him here before. The girl assumed that he was a new worker. The protagonist informed her that he was the new owner of the fortress. The young lady first spoke with bewilderment about him being the owner. Then the realization came to her and she opened her mouth in surprise. She jumped to her feet and jumped back a decent distance. She bowed and asked the owner for forgiveness. She introduced herself as Ain Luludor's maid, and then apologized for not recognizing him. The girl continued to beg the guy. Kinoshita reassured her and told her that she had made him feel better. He thanked her. Luludora stood up and looked at the boy in surprise. Then she blushed slightly. The hero, because of her gaze, thought that he had something on his face. The maid explained what she had heard, that the summoned were terrible people. The protagonist said that rumors come in all shapes and sizes. Luludora said that he is not scary at all. The girl noticed that he was kind, polite, small, and frail. The young man did not understand her words and asked again. She answered that she had not said anything. Luludora asked the boy to make her his personal maid. She added that she was not afraid of him, so she could serve him sincerely. The guy's thoughts were occupied with her mammary glands, but he agreed. The girl thanked the guy and said that she would go on with her business. The young man reminded her about the scarf, but the girl had already run away. The hero continued to think about the girl's breasts. Then he again smelled the smell that was coming from that toilet. He thought that the fortress was beautiful on the outside, but dark, dirty and smelly on the inside. Kinoshita doesn't understand how to live here. He's in complete despair. He thinks that he urgently needs to change everything here, at least get rid of this stench. First, he decides to make toilets. He wants to go to the toilet normally. Karan walked down the corridor of the fortress. She had some documents in her hands. She sighed. The girl recalls a moment that happened to her recently in the office. Some man congratulates her on her promotion. With a nasty smile, he says that becoming the secretary of the owner of the fortress is luck. The girl irritatedly and emotionlessly thanked him for the congratulations. Walking down the corridor, the girl sighed and realized that this really wasn't a promotion. She walked up to the door to Kinoshita's office. The assistant knocked, opened the door, and announced that it was her. However, she didn't have time to greet the guy because she noticed that he was doing something on the floor. Karan looked at the guy with bewilderment and noticed that he was more cheerful than ever in the morning. He agreed and said that he wanted to build a toilet. He said this without being distracted from his work. Suddenly, it dawned on him and he jumped to his feet. The girl shuddered. He asked about whether it was possible to build without permission or whether he needed to coordinate it with someone. The assistant answered that it was possible to build without problems because it was necessary to coordinate it with him. The hero does not yet fully realize that he is the boss here. Kinoshita asked what his duties included. The girl replied that he was probably tired from the long journey, so there was no work today. She would tell him the details tomorrow. The young man wanted to continue his business, but the girl did not leave. He looked at her over his shoulder. The hero decided to ask about what else there was to report. She answered that she had received a notification about Ain Luludora's intention to become his maid. The young man confirmed everything and asked if it would be possible to sort out all the formalities. He does not understand petitions. Karan asked the master an indiscreet question. She suggested that he slept with this maid. The hero began to deny everything. He did not understand where such an idea came from. The girl did not understand why the boss was so embarrassed if it was not true. Kinoshita explained that it was not like that. He chose her because she seemed like a good person. Karan agreed with him, bowed, and said that he could call her if he needed anything. And then she left. Left alone, the young man noticed that the girl knew how to catch people off guard. He looked towards the wall where he was going to put the toilet. The hero decides to begin the analysis. He closed his eyes to concentrate. Then he imagined the layout of his room in as much detail as possible. First, he needs to move the toilet. It needs to create a feeling of more space. And to avoid the smell, he decides to install a siphon. And the finale is dividing the space. The young man asked if he could easily imagine all this thanks to the skill. Then he opened his eyes. In the next moment, he started construction. The young man built with the help of magic throughout the whole day. He was exhausted. The young man fell to the floor and said that he was very tired. He looked at the toilet door and said that the first stage was completed. There was a knock at his door. It was Luludora. She announced that she had brought pajamas. The maid was very surprised when she saw the gentleman lying on the floor. She ran up to him and asked him what had happened. She assumed that he was feeling unwell. The hero replied that he was fine. He had just spent too much mana. Luludora asked him not to overwork himself like that again. She laid his head on her lap. Her chest was next to the guy's face. The hero blushed. The maid covered his hand with her palm and told him to rest. She explained that if you run out of mana, you just need to rest for it to recover. The hero tried to say something, but the girl interrupted him and told him to relax because she was with him now. She also added that she is always ready to provide her knees as a pillow and can also do an oil massage. Kinoshita suggested that he was a bad master. Luludora denied it. The sun is shining through the windows. The hero opened his eyes. He jumped out of bed abruptly and realized that it was already morning. Here he noticed that his strength had been restored. The next moment, the young man was already working in the office with Karan. He was writing something. Then he gave these papers to his assistant to check. She confirmed that everything was correct. Karan informed him that his tasks were finished. The young man was surprised by this. If it wasn't enough for him, the girl wanted to offer him a protocol of inspection of the fortress. The hero refused. Karan complied and asked permission to leave. The young man thanked her for her work. When the door slammed behind the girl, he jumped up and decided to continue building the toilet. Kinoshita continues working on the toilet. He didn't understand what was wrong with this sewer water. It kept flowing. Even though it was interrupted periodically in some places, the hero assumed that it was because of his power. Luludora left the master's room. Karan asked how the master was. She replied that he was still working but would soon go to bed. The assistant was surprised that Tom was still working on that new toilet. The maid confirmed everything and told him that the hero had built new walls and installed pipes, although he could have simply called the earth mages. The girl noticed that the gentleman was such a good guy. He was trying his best. Karan thought that you can't go far on such a base. She sat down on a chair and became despondent. She was thinking about ambitions. Day 5. Karan and Luludora met at the door to the protagonist's room. They heard the master shout that he had succeeded. They looked at each other and looked inside. Karan asked Kinoshita what happened. He replied with joy on his face that he had finished his toilet. Luludora congratulated him and Karan sighed. The hero invited the girls to take a look at what he had created. They went inside the room where everything was arranged. In front there was a cupboard with laundry baskets and all sorts of flasks. The young man announced that this was his toilet. The girls were shocked. They opened their mouths in surprise. There were tiles on the floor. There was a cheerful mirror on the wall. There was a sofa and a table. And there were flowers on the table. Karan assumed that it was a temple. However, the hero explained that it was a murder room. It was a very important room before entering the toilet itself. The maid noticed a pleasant aroma that was floating in the room. Kinoshita explained that it was a diffuser with the aroma of green tea. Then he showed a shelf with cosmetics. He said that even if you use it all up, the supply will automatically replenish. The maid didn't believe that this was a toilet. You can even have guests here. Then the guy invited them to go further and try everything. Next, he introduced them to the toilet. Karan went up to him to take a look when suddenly the toilet lid opened. The girl shuddered. The protagonist told them not to be afraid. The lid opens when approached. This is just a hellish machine. The girls couldn't believe it, but the hero didn't let them enjoy it. He pushed them out the door and said that the tour was over. Luludora said that she wanted to stay here longer. Karan agreed and added that she wanted to continue exploring. Kinoshita told them that he couldn't take it anymore. Karan shouted that he should think about them. They should study all the details and report to the king, so there is no shame in it. The maid suggested patting the guy on the stomach. The main character couldn't stand it and kicked the girls out of the room. The young man came out of the toilet. His face was full of pleasure. The maid, with a dissatisfied face, noticed that he felt better. The young man did not understand why she had such a face. Karan asked permission to take advantage of this miracle too. The young man allowed them to use it whenever they wanted. The girl went to the toilet in a fighting mood. 15 minutes later, the girl came out of the toilet. She called the gentleman. He asked what happened. She screamed that she would no longer be able to use regular toilets. She demands that he take responsibility for inventing such a treacherous thing. The young man said that he simply repeated the toilets from his world. He announced that girls could use this toilet at all times. In return, they must promise to help him when he is in trouble. Karan stood up straight, her face as serious as possible. She swore allegiance to the guy and asked him to rely on her. The satisfied young man came out of the toilet. Karan met him. They exchanged greetings. The assistant announced that he needed to check these documents today and sign each of them. If he needs her, he can just call. The girl wanted to leave. However, the young man managed to install it and asked to explain what exactly to check. He reminded her of the words that if he needed her, he just needed to call, so he asked her to explain everything to him. The girl sighed, and then she asked to give her a 15-minute break. The hero agreed, but asked the reason for the break. She replied that she needed a break to use the toilet. She began listing what she was going to do, namely, use the bidet, wash her hands with soap, spray herself with perfume, and so on. The young man told her to go. The girl went to the toilet, and the young man decided to glance over the documents. He didn't understand anything that was on paper. It wasn't even clear what was what. He didn't understand why it was dark in this room. It was midday. He looked around and realized that there were no windows. Although there is something similar, it is just a hole. Better than no hole at all. It is so small, probably so that there is no draft. He caught himself thinking that if he put more glass windows here, it would become very light and pleasant. The guy looked at his hands. Then he clenched his fist, and something appeared in his hand. He said that he knew what needed to be done. The young man destroyed part of the wall that was in his room. Looking at all this, he noticed that it was quite high here. He had no idea it was so high up here. Luludora entered the room and announced that she had brought tea. She saw that the wall was missing and was very surprised. She approached the gentleman and asked where the wall was. She also noted the beautiful view that opened up from such a height. The young man explained that he was doing a small reconstruction here and asked her not to come close as it was unsafe. The young man was shaking and thinking about how this hole was continuing to grow. The girl noticed his excitement. She put down the tray and suggested that he take a break. The young man said that he really wanted to finish today. Luludora leaned on her back and told him to relax a little with her. The hero couldn't help but think about the chest pressing against his back. However, he pushed these thoughts aside and said that his construction company was a priority. The maid did not understand the meaning of this window. Then she asked what this thing was that looked like ice. The young man explained that it was called glass. The protagonist continued to build the window with his magic. The girl noticed that it looked like ice that was growing. Kinoshita explained that this ice is transparent. It is also hard and has heat-insulating properties. Luludora asked how he made it. But the guy did not answer, and asked her to let him go first. The girl hissed. Karan walks down the hallway. She heads to Kinoshita's office. The girl checked all the documents and knocked on the door. She walked inside. The guy stood there, proud of himself. The girl opened her mouth in surprise. A panorama of the Western fortress opened up before her. The young man completely removed the walls and replaced them with glass. The hero asked Karan's opinion on the matter. He reported that his office was finally perfect. The girl said nothing. Her face was puzzled. Kinoshita asked her not to worry. It wasn't all empty space. He knocked on the glass. The assistant admires the transparent wall. The hero is also delighted, although he still has not realized all of his abilities. The girl turned to the gentleman. She asked if he could do the same in another room. The hero understood what she was saying about her room and agreed. The girl was surprised that the boss agreed. However, the guy explained that he would not do this right now, but after some time. He explained that he also needed to work on the lighting and the bathroom. Karan thanked him. The girl looked down and turned to the guy. He noticed her despondency and offered to make her a window first, if that's what she wanted. She replied that she didn't want to say that. The hero looks at her in bewilderment. Karan said with a smile that they had greatly underestimated him. The young man asked her not to embarrass him. The assistant suggested that the guy go with her to Rosalia, the capital. She is sure that the toilets and windows will please the king and nobles very much. He will become very popular. She asked the guy's opinion about the idea. He thought about it. And Zaim smiled and said that first he wanted to work here a little. He feels that he is still needed here. And there are many plans. Karan smiled brightly. And then she agreed with the gentleman. She then noted that the large windows made the view better, but now she could see everything that was happening in the office. She feels that this is not very good, from a security point of view. The young man asked her not to worry and said that he had thought of everything. He took out a secret gadget that looked like a modern remote control. The girl didn't understand what it was. The young man decided to demonstrate. The hero showed that you need to press a button, and then the blinds will cover the entire view. Karan was discouraged. Kinoshita explained that this is an automatic lowering of the blinds. You can work with them without any problems. There are also 4 lighting controls. He looked at the assistant, who had a stony expression on her face, and asked what had happened. She said that she wanted those windows. Kinoshita stands near the table and admires the view that opens up after the windows were installed. He noted that he had done a great job. He already felt good in his soul. He caught himself thinking that he needed to install windows in the toilet as well. For ventilation, you can install a window with blinds, so that it would be fashionable to open it if necessary. But this is also not very safe. He thought about installing a fixed window for the sake of consecration. However, it would not be possible to open it. Then an idea came to him. He looked at the system window that talked about blinds windows. Kinoshita was very surprised. He didn't understand where this panel came from. Looking through, he realized that this is also part of his power. Here are all the building materials and repair instructions collected in the catalog. He started looking at all the possible furniture, and he liked everything, and he needed everything. Karan entered the office and wanted to tell us about today's plans. However, she stopped when she noticed the boss, who looked like a puppy while looking through a furniture catalog. The girl reported that the young man should bring a sighting to the city mayor. This is the main character's first official meeting. He is very nervous. The girl warned him that he had better not leave the close guard. The guy didn't understand why. She explained that they had a very widespread, unsubstantiated rumor that the hair of those summoned from another world could cure all illnesses. Kinoshita said that it was nonsense. The girl pointed out that this was the province. She said that it was time for them to go. If he didn't make any trouble, everything would be fine. The heroes are driving through the village. The young man asked how many people live there. Karan replied that there were about 2,000. Most were diamond mine workers. The birth rate here is low. The guy assumed that this is why he became the owner of the fortress. Then he looked out of the window and met the gaze of one of the residents. They shuddered and ran away in all directions. The hero clearly became sad. The assistant noticed this. She explained that the locals were afraid of the conscripts, but they wouldn't hurt him. She asked him not to pay attention. The young man wanted to say that he would try when suddenly he heard someone screaming. A crowd of people surrounded the girl and told her to leave. They called her cursed. The girl was dressed in rags. She did not understand anything and tried to hide from these people. The hero asked what was going on. Karan replied that the girl was from the Ulans. This is a noble clan capable of predicting the future and curing illnesses. In the West, they are considered harbingers of misfortune, but in the East, they are revered. One of the men pushed the girl. It was a strong push that made her fall. While the girl was trying to collect her things, people looked at her with disgust. Since she does not understand words, they decided to take decisive action and raised an axe over her. However, Kinoshita could not tolerate this and rushed to help the girl. Karan realized that he had come up with something again and rushed after him. People began to analyze the guy's appearance. His hair color seemed strange to them, and they were also confused by the fact that he was addressed as Sir. They realized that he was called. They panicked. They started to run away in all directions. The hero looked at what was happening and said that everything was wrong. He turned to the girl he had saved and asked about her condition. She trembled and thanked him for saving her. Karan and Kinoshita looked at the girl with bewilderment. The hero remembered that giggling is a defense mechanism during times of fear. He realized that the girl had simply scared him. He squatted down and decided to introduce himself first. The girl repeated his name, and the hero then said that he was 18 years old. The stranger's name is Setia Musha, and she is also 18 years old. The hero was glad that they were the same age. Setia said that she was from the Ulan clan. The young man confirmed that he knew about it. The girl asked him if he wasn't scared. He replied that she was not scary. Besides, everyone was afraid of him too. Setia didn't understand why, because he was kind. He replied that he was from another world, and then he asked if she was afraid now too. She shook her head. Kinoshita said that he was very happy and smiled. The girl blushed from his smile. The guy suggested that she lives here, but she replied that she just travels and collects herbs. The hero looked at the state of her body and clothes. He shouted that she had a wound, and it needed to be treated urgently. Setia wanted to refuse, but the young man insisted on his own and added that one cannot be so careless. The girl blushed. The guy thought that she was in pain, but Karan said that the stranger was just nervous. She shook her head in agreement. The young man apologized for his behavior. She responded that it was she who had behaved disrespectfully. Kinoshita asked her to be more simple, since they were the same age. Setia thinks that the hero is like an aristocrat and a servant with him. Is he really a local nobleman? Karan said that time was running out and they needed to move. The girl was confused by the address, sir, and she asked again. The young man explained that his house was over there and pointed to the fortress. Setia fell to the ground. She lost consciousness. The young man did not know what to do with her, and Karan offered to leave her, but he refused. The hero carried her into the house and laid her on the sofa. He asked his assistant what was wrong with her. She replied that she was most likely just very tired. She must have walked a long distance. She will recover and wake up. The young man agreed with his friend. Karan asked him to let her rest while she went to the toilet. The young man recalls how they tried to find a place to stay for the girl, or at least a chance for her to wash and eat. But all the residents categorically refused. The guy realized that everyone was really afraid of the Lancers. He opened the toilet door and there sat Luludora. The guy was very surprised, and the girl screamed in surprise. The protagonist shuddered when he saw Ayn sitting on the toilet and pulling up her underwear. The girl was looking at the guy. Ayn realized what was happening and blushed, opening her mouth and eyes in surprise. The girl screamed, raising the fortress to her ears so that the birds flew away. The guy blushed and began to apologize to the girl. She grabbed her face with her hands and replied that she should have warned that he was back. Karan came running to the scream with a knife and screaming what was going on. Aina asked where she came from, not expecting new guests in the restroom. The young man began to justify himself by saying that he had come to the toilet and that Aina was there. Karan was very angry about this, and she threateningly asked how a simple maid dared to use this toilet without her master's permission. Aina began to justify herself by saying that at first she simply cleaned up and was afraid of the angry face of the main character's assistant. Karan pointed her finger at the girl, explaining to her that regular staff were not allowed to use that toilet, and she, knowing this, decided to break the rules. The maid winced in pain. The main character entered the dialogue asking to listen to him, and answering that he himself allowed her to use it. Karan turned to the guy and asked with a distrustful look if he was telling her the truth. Takeru replied that it was true and asked Aina about it. The girl did not understand at first, but the guy began actively signaling to her with gestures behind Karan's back, and she understood his plan. Aina agreed and replied that the owner had allowed her. The guy added that the girl had been identifying the shortcomings so that they could be improved further while Karen was looking at him. The assistant's face became surprised while the young man was saying that he was going to build a special room and therefore wanted to ask them to look for flaws. Karan asked if this concerned her too. The guy agreed, saying that it was a secret for now which room exactly, but assured of the quality. Karan glanced to the side in response, and then responded with a little embarrassment that the guy would rely on her. Takeru and Aina breathed a sigh of relief from the easing of the tense situation. The guy with a smile on his face asked both girls to leave the restroom. The girls looked back at the main character with confusion and asked why they should do this. The boy walked up to the toilet and pointed at it, saying he wanted to use it. Karan replied that they would come out right away and started to leave first, while Aina looked at the boy. Aina smiled and rested her head on the hero's shoulder and blushed, winking at the guy. Takeru blushed and was shocked by the girl's behavior. The guy came out and hummed a melody as he entered the office. The main character noticed Setia looking out the large panoramic window. The girl looked down at the view and trembled. The guy noticed that she was already awake, asking Aina to bring something to chew and the tea itself. Setia was surprised by the sudden arrival of her rescuer and asked what this invisible wall was. The guy, like the girl, leaned against the window with his hands, answering her that it was a glass window and saved her whether she liked the view. The girl blushed, not ceasing to tremble, and answered that this room was strict her master, unlike them, commoners. Setia shuddered and suddenly remembered what she had forgotten to do, and with a sharp low bow said glory of gratitude for her salvation. The guy smiled and told her not to worry about it and that everything was fine. The girl replied that thanks to him, her wound had healed. The girl answered, running away, that it was already time for her to go and waved her hand at him, when suddenly she met Takeru's assistant. Setia was given an angry look, which made the girl gasp in fear. The main character looked at the girl and saw a leopard with a mouse, representing the food chain and the cycle of life, while he was in the form of a small Spitz dog. The guy asked Setia to calm down, saying that the tea had already been brought and told the girl to help herself. Ayn brought a tray of tea and sandwiches with a smile, saying that their tea was ready. Setia blushed and began to rub her hands excitedly, saying that it was not worth it, because she felt awkward drinking tea now. Without finishing the phrase, the girl's stomach rumbled, signaling hunger, and everyone noticed it. Setia grabbed her reddened face with her hands and, closing her eyes, asked for forgiveness, explaining that she had not eaten anything in the last few days. The girl burst into tears, thinking how ashamed she was to admit it. The main character smiled and handed the girl a sandwich and asked her to eat it with pleasure. The girl looked at the food in the guy's hands. Setia thought and looked at the sandwich, while the guy continued to wait for the girl to take it. The girl took the sandwich with words of gratitude and did not take her eyes off him. Setia took her first bite, and the girl's eyes lit up. Forgetting her manners, Setia continued to stuff her mouth with sandwiches, which surprised the guy. Setya burst into tears without stopping her meal, and with tears on her cheeks and a sandwich in her hands, she said that it was very tasty. The heroes looked at the girl, who was jealous of joy, with a smile and relief. Takeru decided to ask about the Yulan's clan, specifying that it lives in the east, and asked the girl what she was doing here. Setya looked at the young man and replied that she had come here on the orders of the elder woman. The boy asked who the elder woman was. The girl replied that this was a priestess of the Yulan clan, and she told her that if Setya went west, her destiny would be revealed. Setya noted that the priestess saw what even the other Lancers did not see. The main character was very surprised by this, and he asked the girl if she had seen the future. Setya blushed and closed her eyes and replied that she was still young, and therefore had only vaguely seen it. The guy was inspired by this, and he replied that even so, it was very cool. Saya, embarrassed, replied that she would be added to the fortress, and that she could not have predicted this delicious food. The protagonist asked what would happen if he told fortunes for rights not related to her. The girl clarified what he meant to give an example. Takeru offered Seti to tell his fortune. The girl blushed and tried to say something. The guy interrupted her and simply asked, justifying himself that he was not setting this up, thinking that he was being too impudent. The girl objected to the young man. She stood up and replied that she would do it for him. Setya put her hand to her chest, asking permission to tell the protagonist's fortune. The girl began to explain that different clans had their own methods of prophecy, and that some could see the future consciously, while others were in a trance. Along the way, the girl took a pen and put a piece of paper in front of her. Takeru looked at her and asked how she was doing. Setya replied that she was in a trance during the prediction, and wrote down the prophecy on a piece of paper, although sometimes she herself did not understand what she was writing. The girl put 2 fingers to her forehead, and with her other hand held a pen, suggesting to the heroes that now they will see everything for themselves. The forehead was crumpled, and Setya went into a trance. A light appeared around the girl, and her hair flew in all directions while she was writing. The girl's letter was very fast, and the heroes were surprised by the speed of her writing. Setya was sweating and looked tired. Exhaling, the girl answered the hero that she was done, handing over her notes. The guy extended his hand and responded with gratitude, asking the girl if he were okay. The boy began to read the letter, where it was written that Saria and Takeru would come together as loyal comrades. The boy answered the girl that it was written there that they would be friends, and that was cool. The girl noted that it was great. Takeru replied that there was a continuation, that Setya, with Takeru's support, would create a cure for the great plan. The guy asked what that meant. The girl deliberately replied that she didn't know, because she had many plans for the medicine she wanted to create. The young man sadly replied that he understood everything, and said what happened next, looking at the notes. The guy read out loud that their connection would be strong, which made the girl blush. The guy continued reading that their interesting connection would also improve. Setya, I don't think, snatched the paper from the guy while he was shocked by the notes, and Aini was watching from behind him with a frightening look. Takeru, confused, asked Setya what was meant there. The girl's face twisted, and she excitedly replied that sometimes she wrote such nonsense. The girl grabbed the piece of paper with her teeth and started eating it while everyone else was shocked by her behavior. Setya fell face down on the floor, while the others watched the girl in silence. Setya sat back down on the chair and with her head down, guiltily asked for forgiveness for her behavior. The protagonist answered her that everything was fine and hoped that the girl had calmed down. The guy asked the girl what she was going to do next and whether she was going west. Setya hesitated. I answered that she had injured her leg so she could not walk well, and she had run out of money, so for now she was planning to gather herbs somewhere nearby. Takeru looked at his assistant with a sad expression, and she turned her attention to him and sighed heavily. Karan turned to Setya with a serious expression, asking if she was a herbalist. The girl, frightened, responded in the affirmative and said that the older woman had taught her. Karan said thoughtfully that they had been needing to use magic more and more lately, and asked if she would like to help them with her preparations, although she was not sure that there would be work for her in the fortress. Takeru and Siti were very happy with this offer from Karan. The protagonist said that Miss Karen was amazing and thanked her for her resourcefulness, while she looked smart and exhaled. The guy asked the girl what she thought about the offer and whether she wanted to earn some money, reminding her that suddenly they would be able to prepare the medicine from the prophecy. Setya was embarrassed and bowed excitedly, responding with gratitude for the offer, and she would gladly accept it, adding a question on how she could thank them. The young man waved his hand and replied that he did not need anything, and it would be enough to simply collect herbs and for now to rest. Satya almost cried and asked why they were so kind to her. Takeru smiled and replied that she was the same as him, so he wanted to help. The girl burst into tears, looking at her master. Karan interrupted them, apologizing in advance for this, but asked to approve the girl's salary, since the guy wanted to hire her. The guy fell off his feet, while the girl herself got nervous, and suddenly the hero's assistant smelled an unpleasant smell. Karan told her that she stunk and asked when she last took a bath. Satya blushed with excitement and apologized fussily. Karan asked Ayn to prepare a bath for the girl. Satya said that it was not proper to take a bath, because it was too luxurious, trying to refuse. Karan looked at the girl angrily and replied that if she wanted to work for them, she should look appropriate. Karan carried Satya out of the room, dragging herself along the ground, asking for forgiveness. Takeru watched this scene and thought about the bath. The guy understood that here it meant wiping himself with hot water, and the bath itself was of the same quality as the toilet, which made him shudder. The young man sat down on the sofa and thought about deciding to take a bath. The guy used the catalog. They say he needs to look through it. Takeru was left alone in his office and still couldn't choose. Aini and Satya came after the bath, and the maid changed the girl's clothes while she stood in front holding a candle. The girl said she brought a candle while the boy noticed that it was getting dark. Ain asked, saying that the girl had become very beautiful. The boy answered in the affirmative and asked where they got the clothes. Satya answered that the clothes belonged to Aine. The boy said that she had changed a lot and complimented her while she blushed. Satya screamed and turned pale, while the guy noticed that inside she remained the same. Ain asked the protagonist if she should turn on the light in the room. The young man replied that it was too early, although the girl noted that it was already late, because it would soon get dark. The guy understood this, but replied that he had something to show. Karan came to the heroes and answered that she came with a plan for tomorrow, and asked what was going on and why it was so dark. The people stood in the dark while the guy answered that he wanted to show them something. Karan asked sarcastically what he was going to show the girls in the dark room. Takeru was embarrassed and turned away, saying that the sun had finally set completely, trying to change the subject. The assistant reminded the guy that he wanted to show something and clarified what it was. Aina asked if he was scared and suggested holding hands. Satya replied that it was calming until the guy noted that they were very noisy. The excited protagonist asked the girls to listen and replied that he wanted to show them the lighting. Aina asked if he was talking about those paws from his world. Takeru smiled and responded in agreement, inviting the girls to see and began counting from 3 to 1. When the guy said 1, the room was illuminated by lamps hanging on the ceiling in the form of lampshades. The girls were very surprised by such a device. Even Karan was very surprised and looked around until the guy replied that this was the very lighting. The girls stood in the middle of the main character's office and looked around in shock, amazed by Takeru's new invention, while the guy himself happily watched their reaction. Karan was shaking, holding a piece of paper in her hands and adjusting her glasses, saying that compared to the previous light, one can now do paperwork at any time. The guy blushed and scratched his nose with pride. The girl noticed something and looked at Ain angrily and approached the wall and replied that now she could see all the dusty places. Aine and Takeru were surprised and gasped in unison from the new problem. Karan asked Aina what to do with the wall now, holding a lump of dust on her finger. The girl got excited and asked for forgiveness, answering that in the darkness nothing could be seen. Karan turned to Aine and asked about the darkness. Coming closer, she hinted, but the new big ones in coming up close asked what she meant by only cleaning at night, getting angrier and angrier. Ain was embarrassed and silent. Karan screamed that now the girl needed to be punished and whipped just right. Aina was horrified and responded, burst into tears, screaming from sadness. Takerts was horrified by such a punishment. The young man asked about the whip and replied that it was too cruel. Karan took out the whip and replied that it was still too weak and that his personal maid should be an example for the other workers. The girl asked where the assistant got the whip from and when. The main character's assistant took the stick in both hands and turned to Aina, telling her to prepare her butt for punishment. Aina shook and held back tears, lifting her skirt. Blushing, the girl whined, waiting for her punishment, looking at Karan. Takeru intervened in this whole nightmare, and blushing began to call out and stop Miss Karan, waving his hands. The boy grabbed the girl by the hand and told her that such punishment would not give them anything. Karan looked at the boy and replied that only he thought so, and asked him to let her go. The girl added that discipline only works when there is fear and pain. Takeru stated that it was simply manipulation of people's fears, while Setya silently watched from the sidelines and did not interfere. Karan responded that that was the whole point, asking if she was right. The main character got angry and, blushing, replied that in any case he was against such a punishment for Aini. The guy became confused, and Karan asked why he decided so, looking straight at the young man, as did Aini, who stood next to him and looked at Takeru in surprise. The protagonist responded that corporal punishment violates trusting relationships and prevents people from developing, recalling how he himself was taught this by teacher Nakamura, telling children to be afraid of ruling by force. The guy continued to say that Ain is his personal maid, and accordingly he must make the right decisions and decide for himself what to do with her. Karan deliberately looked at the guy and, putting away the instruments of punishment, answered that she understood him, since he said so. The guy looked at the girl in surprise while she put away the whip. The girl responded, suggesting that they come up with another punishment for her together. The guy remained silent and looked at the girl. Karan suggested, for example, that Aine clean the entire room until it shines and clean the military toilets on her own. Karen Zlobno looked at the maid, asking if she understood her. The girl was upset and answered yes. Satya covered her eyes with her hands, and the guy, noticing this, asked what happened. Satya refused, saying that it was too vivid for her. Takeru asked if she was talking about his office, and she agreed. The protagonist understood her, thus answering her. Takeru looked ahead and replied that he had another amazing thing. Satya uncovered her face and asked with interest what exactly he was talking about. The main character took the remote control and replied that he allowed it to be done this way and pressed one of the buttons on the remote control while the girl was watching him. After pressing the button, the room was illuminated by light from the spotlights on the ceiling, and the guy smiled happily, while Satya was very surprised. The girl's face changed dramatically. She opened her mouth in surprise and opened her eyes wider, not understanding what had happened. Satya's mouth became a diamond shape as she hesitated, unable to string words together. The girl grabbed the guy and replied that she didn't know how to describe it, but she felt out of place in that lighting. Takeru told her that she was exaggerating. Aine and Karen stood in the same confusion and thought about how this light made their hearts tremble. After a minute of getting used to it, all the girls started dancing as if they were on a club dance floor, putting a serious look on their faces. Aine danced while Karan took the big headphones and pressed them to her ear, adjusting the music like a DJ, and Satya did not understand the atmosphere. Satya also began to dance with the others and asked for mercy, trying not to give in to the music, and cried. The dance ended, Satya fell to the floor, while the guy asked Miss Karan to heal the fallen girl with her healing magic. Karan sighed and took off her headphones and replied that they were a lot of trouble. Meanwhile, Aina herself continued to dance. The next day, everyone went about their business. Satya was collecting herbs, Karan was working on her writing at her desk, as was the protagonist himself. The guy was sitting at his desk and exhaling, saying that the work was done for today. The young man cleared everything off the desk. The main character walked and thought about Aina, who was now cleaning toilets, and felt sorry for her. The young man came to his senses and began to leaf through the catalog and say that as a master, he must take care of her. The main character sat down on the bed and leafed through the catalog, saying that somewhere on this page was what he needed. The guy went into the office section and was leafing through the cabinets. They said, "Here it is." The main character was delighted by the number of types of cabinets and did not know which one to choose. Takeru pointed his finger at the tablet, saying that this one was hoping that Miss Karan wouldn't scold him because he spoiled his maid too much. The protagonist continued to scroll through the tablet until Aina told her master that she had prepared a bath for him. The young man thought about it and realized that he had forgotten about bath day. The main character blushed and rejoiced, saying that he would come now and thought that this would be his very first full wash, after leaving the room. The protagonist and the maids entered the bathroom, where water was prepared and everything for washing was ready while steam hung in the air. The guy was very surprised by this sight and turned to the girl while she was telling him to leave the clothes here for which Takeru thanked her. The girl nodded silently, and the guy asked if she wanted to tell him anything else. Ain looked questioningly at the guy and answered that she would help the main character wash himself. This statement shocked the young man. The main character objected, saying that Isa could wash herself. The girl did not understand what he was talking about and said that it was her duty, explaining that this was how it was done. The young man shuddered and asked in confusion if there was any way to get around this rule. Ain refused, saying that if she did not do it, Karan would reprimand her again. The girl was horrified and replied that this time there would definitely be a whip, remembering the assistant's face, and asking, throwing tears, whether Takeru felt sorry for her. The main character blushed and replied that he would allow it to be. The main character asked the girl not to speak in such a plaintive voice. Ain, covering her mouth, said that this is a harsh reality. Under her covered mouth, the girl smiled while the guy answered her so that she would not look at him too much. Ain showed a happy face again and blushingly agreed with the guy. The girl came up to the main character from behind and told him to take off his clothes. The young man was embarrassed and thought about throwing her out. The maid replied that she would help the hero by grabbing and unfastening his belt. The girl continued to take off the guy's outerwear while he tried to look away or close his eyes, trying to hide his embarrassment. While Aina was unbuttoning his shirt, the guy mentally screamed that he was ashamed and did not understand why he had to endure such torture. The boy, closing his eyes, continued to think about the fact that before, he had only one shameful memory, where in elementary school he took his new scarf and sister's underwear and brought them to school, which made his classmates laugh at him. The guy looked at the girl and thought how embarrassing it was when someone else does what he can do himself, and especially if it is someone he knows undressing him. Suddenly, the young man came to his senses. The main character realized that they would take off their underwear and it would always be like this, and began to shake his head negatively, looking for a towel. The girl noticed how the guy was acting strange while he was taking the towel. She asked him what happened. The guy replied that the girl should close her eyes for a while. Ain said that he could not be embarrassed in front of her, but he objected, saying that it was not about that. The girl understood and obediently left a gap, and the guy scolded her for cheating. In the end, Ain closed her eyes and replied that she would not look. Suddenly, the girl opened her eyes and replied that she would only look at his bright face. The guy was very embarrassed by this statement and blushed. As a result, the guy completely undressed, covering his pelvic part of his body with one towel, and turning to the girl, he saw something strange. Ain began to undress and pulled the string of her apron from behind. Takeru screamed, covering his face and blushing, asking what she was doing. The girl continued to take off her clothes while the guy backed away towards the closet in confusion. The girl looked at the main character with confusion and replied that she would not take everything off, and did not understand his behavior. The guy exhaled, but continued to be embarrassed and fuss while the girl's dress fell to the floor at her feet. The main character screamed and called out to Ain, covering his face. The maid stood in her underwear and extended her hand to the guy, inviting him to go. The main character took the girl by the hand, and she told him to walk carefully and not slip. The young man noticed that it was hard to see because of the fog, and hoped that the girl didn't see him either. Continue walking towards Vanya. The guy thought that the girl herself was not visible and quickly came to his senses, trying not to think about unnecessary things, and while the girl was finishing preparing the bath, the young man looked around. Takeru noted that everything was very simple. Aine turned to him and did not understand what he was talking about because she thought it was quite luxurious. The main character asked if the city's residents washed themselves in the same baths. The girl replied that she didn't think so, because there was a public bathhouse in the city. The guy became interested and asked if he should go there too, because it should be very spacious. Aine told him to stop thinking about it, and the guy asked why. The girl's face became gloomy, as if she was sick, and she replied that everything was bad there. Ain checked her hand with water and replied that the temperature was just right, suggesting that the hero climb inside. The main character lay down in the bathtub, where there was a pillow behind him, and rested his elbows on the edges of the side and sighed happily. The young man looked at his hands and asked the girl where they got this water from. Aina answered that it was prepared by water and fire mages, especially for Takeru. The girl noted that only 6 people worked on the bath and added that their work should be appreciated. The guy asked whether the city bathhouse was also heated by magicians. Aina refused. They say that it is heated by a stove, and she heard that the temperature is adjusted by magicians, but she thought that this just happens in limited places. The main character looked at his hands, answering that he understood her, you understand, that he could not get into the bathhouse and regretted it. The maid, happy, offered to rub the guy's back and asked him to get up. The guy stood up, and the girl began to rub the guy's back with a washcloth. The young man closed his eyes and blushed, waiting for the procedure to end. Aina asked the hero if it was painful, to which he refused and said that everything was just right. The girl was soaping the guy and began to move to the front side, when suddenly the guy jerked and was surprised. Takeru gave him a slap on the cheek and replied that he could handle the front himself. Ain burst into tears and replied that it was rude and asked if he wanted to spank her now. The young man, covering himself, replied that he would not do so under any circumstances. The maid hugged the guy from behind and happily replied that he should calm down, while here he tried to stop her, asking where she was climbing. The girl made a sly look and answered how modest the young man was. The main character answered her that it was impossible to go there. The same one noted that he was with me and was angry. Half an hour later, Ain wiped the guy's head with a towel and told him that he was now clean. The guy was angry, but grateful to her, to which he replied that he was not worth the gratitude. Takeru remembered and asked the girl if she could come to his bedroom in the evening. Ain was embarrassed by such a proposal. The guy answered that if she was busy, she could refuse. Aina blushed, clasped her hands together, and replied that she would try to get ready for the evening. The guy agreed and thanked her, because he was dry. The girl replied that he was a real naughty boy and covered her mouth with her hand. Takeru didn't understand what she meant. Later in the evening, the girl entered the gentleman's room and told him that she had arrived. Ain looked at the girls confusedly and wished them a good evening. The main character waved. They told her that she had finally arrived, reproached her for being gone for so long. The girl apologized and justified herself by saying that she was making the bed. Ain was angry and clenched her fist, thinking that she had been happy in vain, because the gentleman had invited her. Kuran noticed the girl's strange behavior, and she became scared. Takeru began to say that since everyone had gathered, he was happy to declare the presentation of the new project from his construction company open. The girls didn't understand what was going on, but they applauded the guy for his presentation. The young man took off the canvas, which was still hidden from everyone. The main character responded so that they could see this stylish buffet. The girls fell silent and looked at the gentleman in confusion. An awkward silence hung over them, and the guy became embarrassed. The main character replied that he was giving the right to open the door to Aina, who had been cleaning toilets all day. The girl was happy with this statement and did not understand why it was her. Aina asked if she could open it for sure. The protagonist replied that it was all in her honor and asked her to continue being his personal maid. Aine and Satya burst into tears from such mercy from the master, while Kuran watched the girls with confusion. Takeru sat down at the buffet and hurried the girl, saying that there was something interesting inside, which made her sit down next to him. The girl opened the first door and saw a new one behind it. You ask what it is. The main character answered that it was a refrigerator and asked to open it. Everyone sat down next to her while the girl opened a new door. There was a lot of food and drinks in the refrigerator, which really shocked Aina. Takeru replied that there were a lot of different things. Aine asked what it was, and the guy replied that they were goodies from his world. Kuran noted that she was already tired of being surprised, while Satya was trying to peek at the contents of the refrigerator. The main character took the sweets in his hands and thought that he had not tried them because he wanted to eat together. Ain asked what was in these bottles, to which the guy replied that it was cola, and next to them were energy drinks. Kuran noticed that there was another bottle lying there and picked it up. Vanya replied that it was champagne, to which the girl asked what it was. The young man replied that it was alcohol with bubbles, which surprised all the girls and made them interested. The main character smiled and blushed. They say that today they have a party asked to eat whatever they want. The boys set the table and sat down next to each other, starting to eat various sweets from another world. Takeru noticed that it was time to open the drinks, and Aina called out to him. The protagonist took the cola and replied that he hadn't had it for a long time until the maid asked for some, because she really wanted to try it too. The main character asked his assistant something. She answered that she wanted to try champagne. The young man asked the network for something. She agreed to something, adding that she was fine as is. The guy started to fuss and asked her not to be shy. The girl hesitated and replied that she wanted to try champagne too. I didn't find it, so I asked the girl if she liked alcohol, to which she replied, closing her eyes, that she loved him very much and asked for forgiveness for it. The guy was told that the Yulan clan can drink alcoholic beverages from the age of 10, while in his world he could only drink from the age of 20, which surprised him. The young man asked if the girl wanted to be very much like adults. She answered that she did not want to, and became embarrassed. Everyone had filled glasses, and the guy made a toast for everyone to drink. The heroes clinked glasses with each other and shouted to drink to the bottom. The girls were very excited and happy. Aine took her first sip of cola and declared that it exploded in her mouth and that it was very tasty. The young man was delighted by this comment. Setia and Karan were both very surprised and delighted by the sight of bubbles in the champagne glass, blushing from the first sip. Karn replied that it was the first time he tried something like this, while Syria asked for another drink. Takeru poured alcohol from the bottle and told the girls to prolong the pleasure. An hour later, the bottles and cans of alcoholic drinks were empty, as was the entire table. Setia burst into tears and begged for forgiveness while drinking beer. The main character noticed that the girl was not quiet at all and asked if she was drunk. The girl shook her head and answered that she was not drunk at all, and the guy was confused and realized that she was lying. Setia pounced on the guy, asking her to listen, and began to stare at him while he asked what was wrong, because she had a menacing look. The girl, with a serious look and blushing, declared that she loved him. The young man also blushed and thanked her. Setia added that she liked the boy from the moment he saved her, putting himself in danger, and lowered her gaze. The girl added that at that moment she understood everything the guy did not understand, asked what exactly she understood, and moved away. The girl made a scary look, showing full responsibility for her words, and replied that she would die for the guy. Setia's gaze clouded over as she replied that it was true, and then her speech became slurred. The girl fell asleep, falling on the guy's lap and snoring. Aine watched everything that was happening from the side and said that she really liked the guy. The guy asked why she was looking at him like that, and after her words, he realized that she was thinking about it too. The main character darkened and recalled the moments when he had problems. The girl smiled and said that she liked to create problems herself. The boy did not understand the difference, and the girl asked what it was while Karan was drinking beer. The main character looked at his assistant and saw a pile of drunk bottles of champagne and cans of beer next to her. The guy asked if she drank it all by herself, to which she replied yes, and asked for more. The main character thought that this was an alcoholic by nature, and confusedly suggested to stop. The girl knocked over a can of beer and a chair and shouted a refusal. Karan burst into tears and screamed that she wanted more, dropping her glasses and jumping up from the sofa. The young man pushed Setia away from his lap while Aine laughed until she cried and thought that his assistant had turned into a big child. Karan hugged the guy and asked for another can, clinging to him. The young man was very embarrassed by such behavior of the girl. Takeru grabbed the girl's hand and asked her to stop, while Kota lay down on his lap and replied that she wanted to drink more, hugging the guy's neck. The main character suggested the girl to calm down a little, but she started rubbing against his chest and asked for at least a little more. The guy noticed that the girl was behaving just like a cat. Takeru called out to the Ainu in confusion while holding his assistant in his arms. The maid continued to laugh, covering her mouth with her hands, and replied that he had a cute face at the moment, while he realized that the situation was out of control. Karan screamed, calling out the hero's name, and said that if he didn't give her alcohol now, she would cry. Setia said in her dream that she would die for the sake of her master. All the girls moved towards the hero and lay on his lap, while the guy himself cried and asked to be saved. The morning came, and the guy woke up in his bed, looked at his hands, and thought that he woke up somehow very early. The young man got out of bed, scratching his back, and looked out the window, saw clouds, and replied that it looked like it would rain today. The protagonist shivered from the cold and thought out loud that it was too early to light the stove and he would be glad to walk in this place in shoes. And then he thought about heated floors. Takeru didn't know if the idea would work, thinking about how his female subordinates wouldn't be able to bend the heavy furniture, already imagining how they would complain. As he left the room, the young man thought about talking to Paimon. The main character went outside to the training hall and called out to the general. The girl turned to the guy's call and asked the owner how he was doing. The young man apologized in advance for disturbing me and replied that he simply needed help carrying some things. The girl replied that it would not be a problem, and, in general, there were soldiers in the hall who could help him. Paimon began to boast that all her soldiers were as good as the capital's warriors. The young man responded with gratitude for his assistance. While the main character was running away, the girl wondered what exactly the guy was going to do, and thought that he was going to conjure another pile of stones like the first time. In general, men were sitting in the hall and talking about their own things, and the guy looked out of the doorframe, looking around. The main character came out of the cell and greeted everyone. The guys jumped from the sudden voice. The soldiers looked at the guy with horror. The main character realized that they were wary of him and was very confused. He didn't know what to say. The young man felt awkward and apologized, and they say that he has some business and asked a couple of people to come out to help. The protagonist noticed that they were all afraid of him, while the guys looked away. Each young man had his own excuses. Someone complained of stomach pains, and someone of their own affairs. While Takeru was begging people for help, one man noticed the young man. The man with long hair pointed his finger at the main character to his friend and smiled. Takeru thinks that he knew it would be difficult, but he didn't know it would be this difficult, when suddenly a voice came from behind him, causing the protagonist to flinch. Two guys approached the main character and replied that if he didn't mind, they could help him. Takeru was very happy that someone responded and thanked the guys, asking their names. The man with long hair replied that he was a private named Gustav, and next to him, the one with short hair was Bumps, and also a private. The main character also introduced himself with his name, and they replied that they already knew about it. Gustav replied that he had heard of Takeru eating human flesh, but in reality, he wasn't that different from the others. The protagonist replied that he didn't look that much like a monster, to which the private agreed. Bumps deliberately asked why the others said that if you drink a decoction from the guy's hair, it will cure all diseases, because if this were true, then he could have been shaved immediately after the call. Takeru replied that if they wanted, he could give them a lock of hair, since he did not mind. The men bowed their heads and thanked him. The main character noticed this and asked if they felt bad. Bumps refused and said that he was ashamed, but he was injured in a recent battle, so lately all he did was fall apart. Takeru replied that then he shouldn't help with the furniture, but the man silently replied not to worry, and said that he was fine, it was just old wounds making themselves known. The protagonist was dejected, and hoped that he was telling the truth. Gustav smiled and turned to my lord. "I propose we get down to business." Takeru agreed, and replied that he would now explain everything to them, to which they understood him. The guys entered the main character's room while he was suggesting to start. Takeru asked the men to remove all the furniture from the room. The privates, happily showing off their strength and biceps, replied that they would be at his service. The men finished moving the furniture while the protagonist happily watched them and replied that he would also have to work hard, putting his hands on the floor. Takeru began his spell, and a light appeared around him. The men holding the furniture in their hands saw this and were surprised, saying that this is the power of the owner of the fortress. I think it is amazing. The protagonist thought that heated floors are obtained by supplying hot water through pipes under cover. Radiant heat spreads from the floor throughout the room, which is combined with it and heats it. Thus, the circulation of heating occurs. The young man thought that the climate here was harsh, thinking about making a portal from the hot country directly to them so that it would never freeze. The main character, while casting a spell, noticed that he really had cool abilities, and answered himself that it was time to continue. The boy wiped the sweat from his forehead and thanked the men for their hard work. The privates replied that they had done nothing special and asked him to always leave the hard work to them, to which he responded with gratitude and smiled. The protagonist, confused, asked if he could contact them again for such work, to which they responded in the affirmative and said that now they had to leave, but the guy stopped them, asking them to stay for a few words. The protagonist asked if the two of them had any more work to do, to which they replied with a refusal, because we don't have a guard, and they will just eat and go to bed. Takeru offered the men a drink, and the two became embarrassed and very surprised by such an offer. The main character smiled. They say that he will definitely have some beer for them, so he will be able to treat them. The privates responded with gratitude and a cheerful blush. The men sat down at the chair while the guy prepared it, filling it with snacks to go with the alcohol and the beer itself. Takeru explained to the guys how to open a can of beer, and when they tried to open it, they saw foam coming out of it. The men took a sip, and were surprised at how delicious it was, asking what kind of alcohol it was, and that it was not at all bitter. while another said that it was as if he had lived only for this moment. The main character blushed as he opened the shark and laughed, saying that he was very glad that they liked the alcohol. The guys sat at the table and began to talk, relaxing after work. Takeru thanked the guys again for the work they had done, to which they refused and thanked him for his answer, asking to call him again. The privates said goodbye, saying that they were now in his debt and were getting ready to leave. Takeru was very happy that the men liked everything and were satisfied. The main character entered his room and, feeling the carpet, began to rub his face against it. The guy took off his shoes and lay down on him with his whole body. The young man noted that he had not had a carpet for a long time and thought that it was very comfortable. He regretted that he had not laid it down earlier. Karan came to the owner of the castle and asked what he was doing, to which he noticed the girl and was surprised. The girl started looking around and asked if it was too warm in this room, to which the guy agreed. The young man lay down on his stomach, leaning against the blocks, and replied that he had installed the so-called heating invention and offered to walk around the room if he wanted to. The protagonist replied that if she wanted to stand on the carpet, she needed to take off her shoes. The girl obediently took off her shoes and sat down on the soft rug, surprised by its softness. The girl said that it was very warm and was surprised. The guy was delighted by this statement and replied that this technology is widely used in his world. The main character suggested trying to use that pillow because it is comfortable to fall asleep on it, pointing backwards. The girl looked at that place and asked if he meant that one. Karan sat down on the pillow and asked if she was doing it right, to which the guy agreed and asked her not to rush. The girl sat down on the big pillow with all her weight. Karan drowned in it and was very surprised by it. The main character smiled and asked if it was comfortable for her, since it was not only cool to sit on, but also to sleep on. The girl opened her mouth and eyes wide, agreeing with the guy, and replied that it was very surprising. The girl replied that in the master's world there are many different technologies and things, feeling the pillow. Karan noted that it was indeed very convenient. The girl began to lose her words and fall asleep. Suddenly you do as if you were completely lying down on the pillow, while the guy looked at her in confusion and remained silent. The main character asked the girl if she wanted something to drink. Karan replied, confused, champagne, if she could. The young man warned her not to get drunk, to which the girl replied that she doesn't get drunk if she drinks champagne. The main character, taking out a new bottle, reminded the girl of yesterday's behavior. Karan said she remembered, but it didn't change anything, and asked to hurry. Takeru refused. They say that the problem arose after. Remind that she was like a spoiled child and held a bottle with a glass in her hands. The girl got up from the pillow in surprise, asking if the guy was joking. Takeru realized that she really didn't remember anything. An hour later, the story repeated itself with yesterday's incident. The girl hugged the guy while he tried to break free from her embrace. The drunk girl said that the heated floor is a great thing. The main character said that he is really happy, asking to be released from her embrace. Karan refused, saying that she liked the guy's knees and squeezed him tighter. The girl blushed deeply and replied that she was hot, started undressing. The main character began to fussily stop her, asking her not to do it. The girl took off her top, justifying herself by saying that it was very hot here, and the guy jumped up. Karan couldn't take off her sweatshirt and asked the main character for help, to which he started crying and also started asking for help. The next morning, the guy woke up and pulled himself up and sighed. The main character felt the back of his head remembering the previous evening and considered it truly terrible. The young man recalled all kinds of indecent acts, of which there were many, and blushed. Suddenly, the main character began to fuss and ask himself what he was even thinking about. Suddenly, the young man thought about the bath. I remembered that it is difficult to create hot water, it takes a lot of time and was very expensive. Suddenly, the guy opened his eyes from the rumbling in his stomach. Takeru started touching his stomach and realized that he hadn't had breakfast yet. I think it might be because he had fixed the toilet and could now eat normally and feel hungry. The young man took the bell and thought that he could simply ask for breakfast to be prepared and began to ring it. The main character continued to ring the bell and did not understand why nothing was happening. The young man decided to leave the room thinking that the maid was busy and wanted to check on her. The protagonist approached Aina's room. Knocking on the door, he heard no answer and entered, asking for his maid. The girl was surprised by the gentleman's arrival and wished him good morning, asking if he had slept well. The young man wished her the same. Takeru replied that he was thinking about breakfast and rang the bell. The girl replied that she was very sorry, but she didn't hear anything at all. The main character was surprised and remembered that he had forgotten about it. I answer that it was his fault. The girl was surprised by such a statement. The guy started to explain that he had replaced the door with a sealed one because there was a strong draft, and because of this the sound insulation had increased well, so the bell could not be heard. The girl turned to the gentleman in confusion and asked what to do now. Takeru gave her a thumbs up and replied that she didn't need to do anything because he would think of something himself. The girl was embarrassed and did not understand what exactly he meant. Takeru turned to the rank and file again and replied that he needed their help again. The men again showed their muscles and replied that they would help him without any problem. Things again, and the guy looked around. The main character started thinking, looking at the wall, how to solve the problem with the sound, and he had one idea. Takeru was very excited about his new idea and future invention. The main character looked at the new invention in the form of an old telephone with a line and replied that it was an internal connection. The guy saw it in the catalog and replied that he could directly contact Ein that way. The young man thought that he would need to connect it to the office and the bedroom, and continued poking around in the catalog while Bumps moved the box. The boy pressed the catalog with his whole hand when suddenly Satya came to him and asked her master what he was doing, saying that she had brought today's list of requests. The young man answered that this was his latest invention and it was called internal communication. The girl tried to pronounce the word and did not understand what exactly. She asked if he would pass the rope through the wall and connect them to each other. The protagonist replied that this was not entirely true and explained that the internal communication was a tool that allowed one to talk to people at a distance. Satya was very surprised by this. The girl asked with interest whether it would be possible to talk to anyone on the internal line. Takeru replied that it was impossible to justify himself, it would be too difficult, and asked for forgiveness. The girl was a little upset and asked for forgiveness for the impossible request. The protagonist thought that his path was the owner of a construction company, not a telephone operator. Suddenly, the young man began to look up and think. The guy understood that it would be quite possible to build radio towers and a radio room. If there was a telephone switchboard, it would be possible to establish a connection, thinking about a walkie-talkie. The main character's thoughts were interrupted by a girl calling out to him, and he replied that everything was fine, thinking that it was better to focus on internal communication now. The protagonist clicked on the catalog again and decided that his motto was to start small, persistently and methodically, while the girl watched him. Everything was ready, and the guy thought it should work, but it was better to check in advance and asked the girl to help him with this. The girl asked how exactly she was supposed to help him, to which he replied that he wanted to check whether the intercom line was connected correctly. Takeru began to explain that if a sound was heard, then she needed to pick up the phone, to which the girl fussed and hoped that she would succeed. The main character asked her not to worry and showed the action of how to do it, and putting the phone to his ear, he replied that it was possible to speak like that. The girl was even more surprised. Satya was upset and replied that he probably wouldn't be able to handle it, and the guy was embarrassed, but continued to smile. The young man ran away and said that he was counting on her very much, which made her worried, looking after the guy. The girl looked at the phone in confusion and waited for the sound. The main character ran to his room and immediately began dialing the phone number in his office, putting the phone to his ear. The guy was excited and smiling, hoping that this would work. The young man waited and did not understand why the device did not work. Takeru realized that there was no answer and decided that the girl was simply confused and could not pick up the phone, continuing to call the line. Suddenly, there was a click, and the main character was very happy that his invention was working, telling the machine that it was him. All that was heard from the receiver was a hissing sound, and the guy asked if he could hear it. Suddenly, a girl's heavy breathing was heard from the telephone receiver, and the guy's face changed dramatically to disgust. The heavy breathing continued to come from the receiver, and the guy began to say that if she did not answer, he would not understand anything. Satya, confused, said that she heard his voice and had auditory hallucinations. The girl on the other side stood nervously while the phone said that she should first calm down and take a deep breath. Satya agreed and obediently followed the instructions. The guy began to tell her to exhale and inhale, remembering the warnings to calm the respiratory tract, to which the girl reported out loud and carried out the orders from her master. The young man asked if she had calmed down, to which she agreed and happily replied that now she could hear the guy much better. The main character thought that it was good, because if it could be heard so clearly, it meant that the experiment had been a success, and he began to say that the volume was at the refracted level and there was no interference. The girl blushed and happily answered yes, saying that she could hear the gentleman's voice very clearly, as if he were very close. The guy asked that it was quite convenient, and the girl agreed and replied that since she couldn't see his face, it was even easier to talk. The protagonist laughed joyfully and replied that she was right. Takeru replied that the experiment was complete and thanked the girl for her help, but she was surprised at something. Setia began to stutter and asked if that was the end of the conversation, to which the guy chuckled and closed his eyes. The main character replied that they could talk like this for a little while longer, and the girl was very happy with this statement. After some time, the guy was sitting in his office and there was an incoming call from the maid's room. Takeru picked up the phone and asked the girl what happened. Suddenly, a very loud voice of a girl came from the receiver, who did not believe that she really heard his voice. The guy quickly moved the phone away from his ear and was very surprised by such a loud sound. The main character, stunned, asked who was on the phone, to which the girl replied that it was General Arietta. Paimon, who served in the Western Corps, asked if she could be heard well, while the angry Ain stood behind her. Takeru became silent and confused, asking the girl what happened. Paimon replied that she had heard nothing of the sort from her assistant about the internal communication and decided to try it herself. The guy was confused. The girl said that she had a serious conversation with the gentleman. The main character asked from the phone what exactly she wanted to know from him. Paimon asked how many internal connections could be established, which made the guy think and was surprised by such a question. The protagonist reflected that his supply of magical power had grown compared to what it had been before, and he replied that he could create about 1,000 of them, but it was impossible to establish their intelligence. The girl asked if that was impossible, then they could have been done at the same time. The guy was embarrassed and angrily replied that she had simply changed the words, and that it would not have changed anything. The young man angrily replied that his magical powers would not be enough to do that at the same time anyway, and asked for mercy. Paimon got upset and replied that she understood the guy, sighing tiredly. The protagonist asked what was wrong, and the girl replied that she actually wanted him to install as many as possible because the full moon was approaching. The young man asked what day it was. The girl agreed and looked back angrily, while Ain nervously chewed the fabric of her uniform and wondered how long they would continue to talk to each other. Paimon began to explain that every month, on the full moon, a huge horde of monsters attacks from the north. The protagonist excitedly asked about the monsters the general was telling about,